Students of Reddit, what's the story of the worst teacher you've ever had? Story 1. A teacher once told me that sand was a liquid, because you could pour it. I then raised my hand and told her that if you had a big enough container, you could pour bowling. The class laughed, and about 10 minutes later I sneezed. She thought I said BS, and sent me to the principal's office. Story 2. This was a gym teacher. The other kids would often bully me and sometimes beat me up. She would only intervene if I fought back, and that was to punish me and me alone. I went to the guidance counselor one time after getting kicked out and told him what happened. He called her, and she said that I was attacking them and they did nothing. Since she was the teacher and I was the student, you can guess who the guidance counselor believed. Story 3. One time while taking an exam in my calculus LL class, I got a random nose that dripped right onto the test. After explaining what happened, she said if I leave the room to go clean up I wouldn't be able to retake. My options were to grab another test and start over halfway through, without being able to copy my previous answers, or leave and fail the exam. I walked out of the classroom and withdrew before I got to my car. Story 4. I had a computer science teacher who didn't really even teach the class. First day of school he stood up and said, "I'm going to be honest with you guys, we're going to be learning this material together." He then pushed us all onto online code camps. The beginning of every class he also spent the first 20 minutes going over anything under the sun except for programming. If your phone went off at any point during the class he said that you had to buy the entire class donuts, but he was exempt from the rule. Story 5. The worst teacher I ever had was my shop teacher, gym teacher in high school. He would not do anything at all. I was able to smoke in shop class and in gym class as long as it was outside running laps or something. I never once heard him tell anyone about safety measures when using shop equipment. A few people got hurt and one actually lost half a thumb, but the worst thing he ever did was hire some of the grade 9 and grade 10 girls to babysit for him and his wife. He would leave his wife at the bar and go home to check on the kids and was eventually caught screwing a 15-year-old girl. After a police investigation they found a ton of homemade on his laptop of him having with many young girls. Last I heard he went to jail for life. This was all in a town of less than 300 people. Story 6. Some crazy substitute we had for geography hit the computer monitor to the floor because of a fly. It landed beside me and I nudged it off with my paper. My elbow knocked the dictionary off the table and I was, and I quote, isolated from class for throwing a dictionary across the room. I was pissed off. Story 7. I am not sure this qualifies. I like reading from an early age and was excited to learn literature in junior high. I had a teacher who just completed her postgrad diploma, and for an entire year in literature class she would just flip pages and say things such as turn to page 88, highlight paragraph 3. That's going to be tested one day. She had to make up a class on Saturday and started telling us how much she hated her job and she couldn't go get wasted on Friday night because she had to show up on a Saturday morning and teach a bunch of stinking kids. She then proceeded to ask us to turn to some page and yell just highlight everything. The entire page will be tested. She got fired because she got caught having with the IT instructor in the computer lab. Story 8. My English lit professor was late to class every day. She was clearly on drugs. On top of that she didn't shower, her hair was matted, and she was so rude. She gave us homework and never took it up or graded it and then would show up and say it's test day with no warning. I had to drop that class after I failed the first test. I believe most of the class dropped after that exam and she didn't come back the next semester. Story 9. Oh, let's see. This teacher threw a chair at a student, nearly threw a desk at a student, threw his keys at a student, threw chalk at students. Hard didn't believe that I could read chapter books. In grade 5 as a 10-year-old we were learning about pH values and tested bleach. It came out as a base because it is a base. He was surprised and told us it must have changed from being an acid because it had been sitting on the shelf for so long. Made a kid do detention in the hall with a sign that said future squeegee kid. He was all round a pretty poor teacher with a terrible temper. Maybe he would have done better in high school when classroom management is a little easier. Middle school, not so much. Edit. I forgot another terrible teacher. The subject was high school French. The subjects we covered were his favorite hockey team, his favorite hockey player, the miseries inflicted upon him by his wife, and how terribly behaved the students at his previous school were. All of this was in English. We didn't learn a lick of French that year, and administration couldn't figure out why everyone kept dropping out of the French program after taking his class. Story 10. I had a math teacher who would leave the class to ask another teacher how to do certain math problems. Sometimes he'd be gone as long as 30 minutes during a 50-minute class period. Suffice to say no one in that class learned much. Story 11. An English teacher I had in high school asked the class to spend half of the class in the library, finding a love poem. I chose Sonnet 130 by Shakespeare. It's not a standard love poem. It says nothing nice about the lady until the very end. She failed me on the project. The very next project was to choose a poem that described our general feelings around that time. I chose a poem from the existentialists. I don't recall exactly which one, but it was about suicide. Again, I failed the project. I'll never forget her response after I read it aloud. Why would you choose something so awful and sad? A girl in the class said, maybe that's how he feels. She sent me to the principal's office for punishment. By the end of that year, I was in a mental hospital for attempted suicide. I was there for 3 months. Story 12. Second grade had a cool girl named Deja in my class. Our class made a joke where we'd say Deja and then VOO in a loud and deep voice. Teacher was super ticked and took Deja's bag, the rectangular ones with the 2 metal bars on the back, and slammed it against her back. I heard the most blood-curdling scream of all time and the whole class fell silent. What happened to the teacher since this was near the end of the year and I moved away after school ended for unrelated purposes. Story 13 in 5th grade I had a teacher who disliked me because I was bullied a lot and she had to take of it and talk to my parents a lot. One day I was playing kickball and got borderline assaulted by some kids and she saw, came over, then let them go inside. She looked at a dirt-covered me and said, "Don't go telling your dad about this." Next day Dad went into school and had a very long talk with this teacher and the principal. I'm pretty sure she was hoping the school year would end sooner. Story 14 My Welsh professor. She assigned textbooks that were out of print, couldn't explain anything for, responded to questions by repeating herself, and her syllabus was just header info and a single line that said, "The purpose of this class is to learn Welsh." Story 15 I was part of a 2-year program in grade 9 in which I took a few classes together in sequence and did a project at the end of each year. It was near the end of the year and the project was underway. We were made up of groups from years 1 and 2 of the program, so freshmen and sophomores working together. I was sick for a week and went to the teacher, let's call her MS, module of the year 2 students, for information about what I missed because she was in charge of the project. She told me it was on her teacher page and I thanked her and left. The next day I get a bunch of texts from sophomores and juniors that MS module had complained about me by name, saying I wasn't afraid of her and was a disrespectful student for not checking the website first and asking her before school. She really hurt my feelings and hurt the way my peers view me as a person. She then did it again the next year, this time telling a class of sophomores about how I was terrible at presenting and got a poor grade, something which was false. I got a 92. I then noticed she set the Google Classroom we used for handing things in to automatically share every document we produced in class along with our scores on those works with a woman in Arkansas in New York named Jody. I asked her about it and she told me to tell nobody. I asked my friend if he saw it and she overheard me. She threatened to send me to a week of detention if I told anyone else because she was obviously violating FERPA, NYS Ed policy, and our district's policy. The next week I took my midterm and failed 63, lowest out of 60 students in her class. I've never gotten less than a 94 on midterm's final SANI English test. I asked to see it, she just gave me an old Regents test which any English teacher could grade because I wanted a second opinion. Apparently she throws them out after grading. Sorry that was long, I just wanted to say something. Story 16 Okay, maybe not the worst teacher, but definitely the strangest, Mr. Pratt. He was a substitute teacher I had in high school in the 90s, inner city school. He was an older black dude with a loud mouth. There were a lot of students though, who always mouthed back to every teacher which made learning difficult. Mr. Pratt had an odd choice when responding to these kids. Imagine a well-dressed, but definitely ghetto-sounding substitute who when a student tried to act out, would pull a puppet, obviously custom-made and look just like him, suit and all out of his desk. He would then start berating the student via the puppet. The puppet was called Pratt Daddy by the way. He would make the student talk to the puppet, and apologize. Most didn't, they were laughing and tried to talk over Pratt Daddy, in which case Pratt Daddy, the puppet, would kick them out of the class and lock the door. Then the puppet went back into the desk drawer, and Mr. Pratt continued. It was odd. Story 17 My form tutor for year 9, also the art teacher. She refused to take action when somebody created a Snapchat account under my name and sent images to dozens of people around my school. Shortly after this I got in a fight because a guy was still pissed about the Snapchat situation and punched me in the jaw when I had a retainer. From this she decided to secretly send loads of emails to my mother suggesting that I more than likely have autism. I have since been basically forced into getting checked up about it, only for the doctors to confirm I don't have enough symptoms for diagnosis. Because I criticized this teacher a lot due to this, she treated Annie really poorly in art lessons and did very little to get involved with me when I reported or got witnesses being bullied. Story 18 I was studying architecture a few years ago. I was taking a class which was in charge of this renowned, elderly teacher architect, so we were having a debate of form versus function, and I made a point the teacher didn't agree with. Most of my class agreed with me and a few classmates made similar points. Right after class, the teacher pulled me aside and told me he didn't enjoy being embarrassed in front of his students, especially by a woman, and then said I wasn't welcome to his classroom anymore. I ended up failing the subject and had to take it again with a different teacher the following semester. Story 19 My 8th grade Spanish teacher. We had a test for a novel that was pretty difficult because the teacher lied to us about a certain question in the exam. Then, when people confronted her about it, she just changed the subject and blamed the students. Like, WTF are we supposed to do? That which had the nerve to try and prove us wrong. Anyways, I ended up scoring her class medal, so it could have been worse. Edit school subject medal. Story 24th grade teacher who lead the after-school dance program at my elementary school. She was known for her explosive temper and playing favorites. Her favorites were a group of girls who considered themselves popular. Being invited to their pool parties meant that you were cool. This teacher used to invite these girls for sleepovers at her house. Well, this teacher hated me and I desperately wanted to feel accepted. So one day she was testing the class on the 9 times tables, and the way that the test was set up was that we would have to recite it. Some kids were allowed to be tested in private. I fumbled for whatever reason and started speaking in a low voice out of embarrassment that I was fumbling. I remember her just screaming at me why I don't get anything she teaches. I wasn't allowed to sit back in my seat until she was done screaming. I remember shaking how scared and humiliated I was. Mixed with anger and embarrassment, I snapped my reading glasses in half. A couple of days pass and parents ask me why I'm not wearing my glasses until I burst into tears over what happened. All I know was that mom scheduled a meeting, and well, that teacher didn't bother me for the rest of elementary school. Miss. And you're a and do not belong around children. When I was in the first grade, there was an infamous substitute teacher in my school, Rygon, Mr. Hunter he was called. His name was hissed under breaths and passed on from student to student between schools. Heavens help you if you got this grizzled, hunched old walnut that was occasionally pulled out of retirement to bestow his tyranny upon innocent children. But I was young, foolish, I didn't believe the stories my siblings told me. And so, being the cutesy teacher's pet I put on my brightest smile the moment he walked into my first grade classroom and chimed, "Good morning, Mr. Hunter," with the rest of the class. "Whumph," he said, or something like that, a displeased, non-committal noise. It only went worse from there. A quick side note, I have a name that is one of those names that can be pronounced different ways. Let's say my name was Kiara, and pronounced Kara instead of Kira. I'm used to getting it spoken wrong by substitute teachers at this point, so I have no problem politely correcting teachers. Mr. Hunter got to my name on the attendance. "Kira," he said. "Oh, Mr. Hunter, sir, it's, actually Kiara," I corrected in a chirp. All broke loose. This absolute of a lowered the attendance board and started shouting at little tiny me, telling me that because he was the adult and I was the child, he knew better than I. Obviously my parents pronounced my name wrong, and obviously I was too thick to realize it. He told it was rude to have corrected him, and for the rest of the day he called me by the wrong name. So yeah, that guy. Story 21. When I was in 7th grade, I had this teacher who was the worst teacher I could possibly imagine. Let's call her Ms. Gale. 1. Ms. Gale would promote her book every 2 minutes. 2. Speaking of the book, it was awfully for middle schoolers. For an example, a chapter of the novel explained how badly one of the characters wanted to have with a girl in his school. Not to mention the book was about 14-year-olds. 3. She desperately wanted to be popular out of all the teachers. For instance, once she went up to a guy who was the alpha male in our school. She deadbeat stared at his eyes for 2 minutes straight. She then gave him the most terrifying grin and said, "Wow, you're popular, miss." Gale scared the day living out of the kid and he rarely spoke to her in class. For one day she was giving a presentation in class and said some unnecessary about one kid muttered, "Man, what there miss." Gale rotated her head like the girl from The Exorcist and dragged us out of class. He got a detention for a week, and no consequences for her. 5. I had a tall, dim-witted, but gentle friend in my grade. Let's call her Theodora. Theodora had Ms. Gale as her advisory teacher. One day she was late for advisory and she had a late pass with her from history. Ms. Gale gave her a cold stare and tore her late pass in half. She gave Theodora a detention for being late, although once again she had a late pass. Well, things did not turn out well for Theo, as she was bawling her eyes in front of the whole class. Ms. Gale, as she was, called her out for being a crybaby. Theo's mother later called the old hag, saying it was a ridiculous reason why Theo received a detention. Ms. Gale got no consequences whatsoever. 6. Ms. Gale purposely gave FS to the people she hated in the class, but gave S to the popular sluts in our school. 7. She humiliated multiple kids for their looks and once called out a kid for looking like the hunchback of Notre Dame. 8. She gave a kid an F for plagiarism for one of the book reports. He only quoted the section of the passage for evidence. 9. Gave a detention to a kid who said Jesus Christ and called him out for being anti-Semitic. 10. Once there was a debate between two loudmouths in our school in which they argued about who was the hottest girl in the school. Ms. Gale got involved and said, "At least I'm not a virgin like her." The two never talked beside her for the rest of the year. 11. She was a terrible teacher. She never explained the concepts and gave us worksheets without any hints or clues. 12. Rumor has it that she worked at Catholic school and she started punishing the students for illogical reasons. She then told the kids to go to over a debate between if Andrew Jackson was an innocent man. She got fired. I can't believe she's still a teacher. Edit to those doing research on my former teacher. I decided that I should delete the title of her book and keep her out of the public by naming her, so don't assume that Ms. Gale is her real name. Second edit. Hey Ray Sabonis. Once we were reading the Outsider's book and she was directing a presentation about what would be in it and so on and so forth. It was going well until one of our terms were bull session. She explained how bull session meant bullshitting. Now, I understand it's important to explain the terms used in the Outsiders, but this lady gargled the word bullshitting every time she got the chance to. This continued until one of the neighboring classrooms walked in the middle of her swearing sessions since it was getting extremely loud. She blamed the other students for using foul language. After that, she moved on to her presentation about famous figures in the Outsiders book, ranting about how one of her students didn't know who the Beatles were and yada yada yada. Now that's what I call bullshit. Story 22. I probably have you all beat. 8th grade AP Math. So essentially I was taking an 11th grade math class in grade 8. She was a Nazi camp survivor, she wasn't a guard, but her attitude said otherwise. She was short, fat, extremely racist, hated men, and had both breasts amputated due to cancer. There was only one other math teacher. This one almost only taught girls, but of course a few of us were unlucky enough to be stuck in her classroom. We were ignored completely at best. At worst she would make fun of everyone for whatever they were, black, Hispanic, Asian. She would ridicule boys for anything we would do wrong and would try to fail us for existing. She was a known problem. The school and school board would do nothing against her because she was a survivor. Story 23. Math teacher who was so catty, so unorganized, so unprepared despite having worked as a professor for over a decade. and so inconsistent and not helpful that when it came time to send in our reviews, we all wrote that she was terrible and gave her 1s and 2s. I was so stressed from worrying about failing and losing my financial aid that I got ulcers from it. Story 24. So my 7th grade math teacher, she was 400 pounds and we gave her the nickname of replacing the beginning symbol of her name with fat, for example Lawrence, Fatrance. I'm not staring her name because she could be on Reddit seeing this, you never know. Every time we would have her class she would yell at us one way or another. Just constantly about anything. One time she tried to get a kid a referral when he wasn't even in school and homesick. That same kid was also being bullied by every student basically. Pray for Gabe. She also referred that kid for being in a bathroom for 2 minutes claiming it was 15. Most students backed Gabe on this even though mostly everyone bullied him. Oh, but this isn't the end of it. She had a daughter in the same school as us. The daughter looked like her if she was younger, skinnier. Also cute, the daughter hated the living out of her to the point of almost stabbing her. But despite all of this meanness in her, she had a husband that was in the military. Story 25. Sorry, this is going to be long. I seem to have a lot of unprocessed trauma. LOL. In middle school and now in college, I had the displeasure of experiencing a married math humanities teacher duo who were horrible people and took their relationship issues out on their students. The math teacher was just extremely weird and would go on strange rants, scream, and clip her nails in class. This happened during a test once. The only sound that could be heard was pencil scratching and the clipping of her nails. I still remember it and shudder. She also made up ridiculously hard to follow technical rules about formatting that would ruin your grade and even put you in detention if you didn't follow them correctly, like drawing exact margins on homework, boxing answers, and getting all your work signed by a parent. I was a good kid but went to detention for the first time that year. Eventually, half the class was in and out of detention every week. Worst of all, she seemed to single out her students to torment at random. A small, shy, emo-ish Hispanic girl, was her favorite target. I remember her once yelling at me in class to the point of making me cry for fidgeting with my eraser, which she described as playing with dirt. She brought it up relentlessly in class for a month, calling me dirty in front of my classmates. The worst time is when she saw my friend eating a cookie in the hall. For some reason, she absolutely flipped her and tried to force her to spit the cookie into her hand because eating in the hall was not allowed, a rule that was never enforced. My friend apologized but naturally refused, swallowed the cookie that was already in her mouth, and thought that was that. The teacher continued to scream at her, got her detention, and tried to get her suspended. Her husband was the humanities teacher, e.g., history, current events and social studies. He was, to put it lightly, blatantly racist. When we talked about the Holocaust or the slave trade, he would ham-fistedly point out the Jewish or black kids in the class and basically be like, just like your ancestors, and keep bringing the kids up as examples despite clearly making them uncomfortable. This wasn't even the most blatantly offensive part. During parent-teacher conferences, he literally told my mom, an immigrant, and myself to our faces that I was late often and valued socialization over hard work because I was Latina. He said something along the lines of, just because it's okay in your culture doesn't make it okay here. I taught in Costa Rica once, I should know. I was a meticulous worker who would chat with my few friends here and there, but not excessively, which of course wasn't the most up part about his statement. Me and my mother were speechless, and she didn't say anything, but there were tears in her eyes and she was understandably mortified and angry. His words hurt me, but it hurt most of all to see her like that and feel so helpless. They both continuously berated me in class and gave me unreasonably bad grades. I was a quiet, extremely shy, hard-working kid, known to be a bit of a goody two-shoes. Before their classes, I had never had any academic difficulty and humanities had been my favorite subject. After a while, I shrunk completely. I stopped trying in both of their classes. I was so ashamed, frustrated and scared of them. My already low self-esteem dropped considerably, and my anxiety in class situations worsened. Although I consider myself to be quite intelligent and was able to still get straight A's after their classes, all throughout high school, I retained an aversion to speaking to my teachers and contributing in class, causing my academic life to suffer quite a bit. So Mr. and Mrs. Penn, and I'm glad you got fired and divorced. Story 26. First grade, I had some trouble keeping up with other students on writing-based assignments. My teacher's way of making sure I got my work done was to withhold my lunch and any food whatsoever until I finished all my work, even if it meant I left school late. Parents got pretty pissed when they found out. Story 27. RIP my inbox. Since 100 people have posted their stories, I'll post mine. Ever had a teacher that hated their job with their entire being? Well, that would describe Mrs. S quite well. She was a college professor during the summer, and a middle school geography teacher for the other 3 seasons. I had her in middle school. Our first day of school, she handed out a 10-page syllabus of just rules. This ranged from basic stuff such as don't cuss and turn in your stuff on time, to weird stuff like don't talk without her permission. She took that silence rule very seriously. She hated any noise, she would rarely talk, never gave any sort of lessons in front of the class. We would walk in, and there would be a tray with our work for the day, and then we would have to take our textbooks out of our bag. No class set. Her choice to promote student accountability and just sit at our desks and fill in everything on the scantron that came with it. We did this until administration came into the room. Then all of a sudden, she was just up in front of the class, being fun and interesting, showing us songs to help remember countries. One time she slapped a kid in the face because he was asking another student for help, and she heard him talk. Any sort of noise was banned. Story 28. I was a JR in high school and was in a calculus class. The teacher was a horrible woman. She threw a desk at a girl. She openly drank alcohol. The first 15 minutes of class each day was a smoke break. Also, she would assign students to teach lessons so she could sleep in the closet. We tried to report her to the administration, but the accusations were too ridiculous and they couldn't believe they were true. Story 29. I had a business law professor when I was an undergraduate that was so boring and bad. Practically no one could endure an entire class. He actually said he would give an A to any student who attended 6 full classes. It was the last class, and I had only attended 5 other sessions. At break time I went to the student union and shot pool for half an hour, and then wandered back. I was the only one that came back. He actually said, "Oh, I thought tonight was the night no one would come back." I felt bad for him. He was a lawyer, and was probably 70 years old, and he was teaching because he was broke. Story 30. High school shuffled teachers around and ended up with a surplus of science teachers and a lack of literature teachers. This lady might as well had never read a book in her life. She had heavy reading comprehension issues when teaching the classics, thought Don Quixote was a real historical figure, and had a weird fixation on the musical Cats. Story 31. I was talking to one of my professors, asking for advice about my future. I asked him if I could get an internship, and he looked at me dead in the eye and said, "Isn't it a little too late for that?" I got so self-conscious about that at the time that I just stopped looking for an internship. I was 19. Story 32. My last year of secondary high school, my normal French teacher was on maternity leave, replaced by a woman who spent most lessons on tangents about her life, openly admitted to not liking the school and the students to us far too often, gave someone full marks on an essay despite knowing full well by her admission that it was plagiarized. But worst of all was just her total apathy and decision to force her way out 3 months before her contract ended put so much strain on our head of languages, a man who is without doubt my personal hero. She came in constantly judging, not ready for a school that wasn't one of the most high-class privates in the country, and basically ruined my hero teacher's year. Her former student here, it's a hard choice because I went to a tiny rural school where most of the teachers were either a new M.Ed. graduates looking for experience before moving on to higher-paying jobs or be the borderline incompetent ones who were transferred from other districts because they couldn't be fired due to tenure. Let's see, was it the art teacher who insulted students and gave lower grades to anyone whose art was better than hers, which wasn't hard, be the freshman gym and health teacher who flirted with female students and bragged about holding blanket parties for gay crew members while he was in the Navy, and the freshman science teacher who taught that aliens built the pyramids and made us watch Jurassic Park in class 4 times while he read novels at his desk. Be the sophomore chemistry teacher who was originally hired to be an elementary school nurse and knew SFA about chemistry. Edit. I've added a story about her to our malicious compliance. The senior English teacher who pushed her religion in the classroom and gave quizzes on asinine things like what color a character's shoes were rather than plot, themes, etc. I ultimately have to go with a freshman science teacher because he taught things that were actively wrong. For example, in addition to the aliens thing, he insisted that insects and spiders were arthropods rather than arthropods and actually docked my score on a quiz for using the correct term. Oh, and the superintendent was probably a full-blown sociopath. Story 33. She had the same answer for every question students asked. Cal 2. You should do enough homework to be able to answer that for yourself, but she also lived 2 hours away from that community college. I had some others that I felt were worth mentioning. HS math teacher threatened to fail me because I finished the assignment too fast. HS history teacher told me I was not allowed to wear my System of a Down shirt because they looked satanic. 7th and 8th grade English teacher had a 7-tall desk that took up literally half of the classroom. While I'm not sure what they were, she would pop 5 to 10 pills during every class. 7th grade science teacher had a breakdown one day and sent 25 students to the principal at the same time. Story 34. My 2nd grade teacher was Sister Bridget. She didn't like me at all. One day I was feeling ill, and I asked to use the restroom. She told me I was lying. As she tried to tell me why I was a liar, I vomited all over her shoes. Story 35. My maths teacher who became known as a boo-boo. He had a dislike for the special needs kids in the class. That was including me. Unfortunately, I was his favorite to harass too, to avoid getting distracted, graffitiing or making a mess. Teachers got me to read a book. He knew this. My classmates knew this. He decided to yell at me for it anyway by forcing me to leave the classroom. I can't do maths whatsoever. It's still an ongoing problem. You can ask me what's 22 and he'll still stare at my feet, waiting for you to tell me a maths question you already asked. I just can't hear it or read it. He knew this but never bothered to report it. Rather, he just made it more difficult for me. He also used to walk around with no shoes on. My college teacher was probably worse. This is a man who is no longer allowed to work with the Queen's horses. No one knows why. Some say it's because he's aggressive, and someone said it was because he lost his and hurt a horse co-worker. He was put to work with special education. They put a man with aggressive tendencies to work with special ed students where some were still mentally 13 years of age. He made my friend cry. She's autistic and has ADHD, and was struggling. He invaded her space and yelled at her. I arrived only a few minutes late one day, literally by a few. He hadn't even started talking, and he told me to go sit in the arena and stay there. For 2 hours I was sat in the cold in the arena. I almost missed my lunch because he forgot I was even made to sit in there. My last day I was anxious, stressed and feeling sick. I had my hood up, it was raining and it made sense either way. Telling someone to remove their jacket wasn't okay. The college knew the area they were located in was very cold. We were allowed to wear coats. The other students had their coats on. He demanded I take mine off. These horses are around wheelchairs and mentally young adults. Nothing really phases them at all. You jump at them from behind and they wouldn't give two. His reasoning was that my jacket would scare them. I was wearing a black coat. It was part of the horse care unit's dress code. It was black and it was fine. I then said fine. He'll go then when he got angry at me for refusing. So he decided to hold the gate shut. I'm 52, much shorter than average, and he was twice the size of me. Not mention at this time I was in a very vulnerable state of mind and he knew that. I took off and hid, ended up having a meltdown. Autistic meltdowns can be violent. There are risks where damage can occur to others and the person who's having a meltdown. I thankfully didn't hurt anyone. I did however have a large bruise on the side of my head and dented the wall from smacking my head against it as hard as I could. The woman in charge of horse care tried to cover up what had happened and say I was lying, only my friend had been repeatedly texting my mother. My friend is the type of autistic who struggles to lie, and will often blurt the truth no matter what. With the messages my friend sent, the woman admitted that mistakes were made. They were reported and had a surprise inspection a week later. One teacher no longer works there, and the horse care section had to go through training. Last I heard, the aggressive man was no longer working there. The overall rating was very poor. I don't want to meet either of those people again.